this is the stuff I think about like almost all the time. So um, we'll ask some questions after too. So disclosure wise, there's something in there with some grip fusion there with I don't go too far into it, but it's something we can talk about later. So if you go back, and this seems like yesterday, but I was in residency, and at that time at Hopkins, we were still taking care of the Orioles, where my mentors were. And I would talk about these different aspects of pitching and how to throw different pitches. And I was amazed that they looked at me like, that's crazy. I didn't know that about these things. I bet a lot of the team physicians would like to know about this. I was like, there's no way that they don't know about this. And I went, and I remember Tony was there and Chris was there and Schick were there and Tom Noonan. And I presented it, and a lot of it was talking about some mechanics and some types of pitches, and it was really received well. And one of the points, and we've come a long way since then, but was mechanics. And the whole thing, when I read the literature at that time, and people would say, these are perfect mechanics, and this is the way you should throw, I was like, that's crazy. I mean, there's certain things that you need to hit when you throw, but if you try to make everybody have perfect mechanics and throw, that person's not going to go very far in sports as a pitcher unless they're Greg Maddux. It's just too easy to track as you get higher along. So deception is good. Then Kibler talked about it in tennis players, and he called it nodes. So you can have your own individual type of mechanics, but you hit certain nodes. You know, breaking your hands with your weight back over the rubber, striding down the mound, but your weight is still back, then reaching out. And if you hit these nodes per se, you can still have all these other wild type of mechanics that make you deceptive and still remain healthy. The best pitching coach I ever had was a guy named Howie Gershberg there from Long Island, and he had, 100+ pitchers in the big leagues. He said, you want to know what your arm slot is? You pick up a rock and throw it at a stop sign. And my arm slot's probably different than Dr. Romeo's. Pedro Martinez's arm slot's different than Ben McDonald's. We can get into horizontal tilts and everything else, but the bottom line is people have a native arm slot, and we need to know what that is. If you try to take them out of their arm slot, you could be causing some trouble. Now, do we modify some guys like into a submarine and try to do things like that? Yeah, those are one-offs. But generally speaking, with arm slots, we should know our pitcher's native arm slots so you can identify if they start to come out of their arm slot with fatigue, etc. And if you really think about it, what I was talking about, and this will get into the pitch stuff, is if you start falling down the mound and we all see it and the arm starts dragging, that's when the pitches don't do what they're supposed to do. Right? The balls stay up, they get hit, curveballs hang in the zone, etc. So really, the thought of all this, and my first job was at Wake Forest, and I sat down when I got such good response from the baseball community about this stuff. I thought, man, we really need a bridge. The doctors, the ATCs, the PTs, the sports scientists, etc. Make a bridge so we can all come together and be talking along the same lines. And, the thought was to build this pitching lab. Now it really blew up after I had already gone, but the guy who ran a lot of these sessions, and I guess it's going to go on this year too, was Mike McFerrin, who's now our pitching coordinator with the A's. But he started this and called it the bridge, and that's exactly what it was. So this was kind of the first pitching lab, if you will, that came on the scene, and it's doing extremely well. So types of pitches, okay? Did I skip one? Yeah. Types of pitches. We don't have to go through there. There's a lot of types of pitches. We can keep adding to this, but I'm going to, a lot of this is probably very basic for you, but every now and then it's good to review this. Bottom line with baseball, good pitches get people out more times than not. Bad pitches don't more times than not. That's baseball, one-on-one in a nutshell. So we want to really try our best to get guys out and execute the types of pitches we want to make. So four-seam fastball. Everybody knows it. It's like seaming up a basketball. Four-seam. That's how you're going to throw the ball to keep it the straightest, keep it in the air the longest, goes the fastest. That's how all the position players are going to seam up the ball to throw it across the infield or from the outfield or from catcher to second, etc. Bernoulli's principle, we all remember that. That's kind of how this works. That's why it stays up in the air the longest. If we look at an example of this, this is going to be a fastball away. You can see very hard, very straight. Okay, versus a two-seam fastball. A lot of people call this a sinker, where you put your two fingers along those seams. Now, it's going to have generally less velocity than a fastball. And if a right-hander throws it, it's going to tail down and in on their throwing arm side. And this is a very effective pitch because If guys hit it, a lot of times they'll hit it on the ground. So here's the same pitcher with a good example, and you can see how it goes down and in at 97. That's why he's making a lot of money. And then we talk about a cut fastball where he has an off grip. And if you're going to talk about cutters, you have to talk about Mariano, right? I mean, Klesko knows that ball's coming. They all knew it was coming, and they still couldn't hit it. So that's just off centering your hand like that and throwing it right down the middle. Change up. So on the right there, that's if you were throwing, there's my fastball four seam, right? And there's a straight change. More times than not with change ups, you see the two fingers that I'm holding loose there for a two seam fastball, and you throw a circle change with your long finger and your ring finger on the seams and the circle on the side. There's just more friction points. Bottom line is you should throw that ball with the same arm speed. The hitter should think it's the exact same pitch. It looks like a two-seamer, but it's actually going 10, 15 miles an hour slower. So think about his two-seamer, and that's your changeup, right? That you're fooling them with the speed of the pitch, but they can't tell it's a different speed. Curveball. Now we can talk about spin rates later, but guess what? I think everybody that knows baseball would say Clayton Kershaw has one of the best curveballs. Guess what? The spin rate's one of the lowest. Do we have all the answers to spin rate? I don't think we do. It's kind of interesting to think about. Generally speaking, 12 to 6 is a perfect curveball. If you're a lefty, then you're going to be more 11 to 5. And if you're a righty, more 1 to 7. Now, what's interesting about this when we start talking about mechanics of throwing and potential injuries, etc., is this is the one pitch where you're not out front. All the other pitches, two-seamer, four-seamer, changeup, sliders that we'll get to, etc. This is the one pitch where you're coming in supinated already, and then you're snapping ulnar deviation. So this is different, right? And we need to think about that. So you'll see this is a bit slower and a bit more of a loopy curve versus a slider that you want to look like a fastball, right? So this is fastball, 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 but your grip is going to allow it to slide. Different than a cutter because you want that to change planes. Cutter, same plane. It's a sliding on glass. Slider, changing planes. So remember his four-seam fastball? Well, that's what he wants this to look like, but then it slides down and away. And that's what's going to make that pitch effective. And then Chris Ahmad and I have talked about this for over a decade, but the split finger, this is the best pitch in baseball. Probably injures people, injured me probably, but if you can throw a good one, devastating. I mean, this is unhittable right here. And the guys that have good split fingers, it's just incredible. It's kind of lost its way, probably because we think it was causing some injuries. Now, I looked into this with the A's a bit last spring training, and this is what's very fascinating about grips. We had 6 guys or 5 guys. There's 2 different grips, 3 different grips, 4 different grips. Guess what? They're all saying they're throwing a split finger fastball. Interesting, right? 5 different styles of doing it. And look at the difference in the hand sizes. Guarantee you that one up in the right-hand corner is going to have a lot different action than that one over there next to the on the bottom row, the first one. So something to think about. So are grips associated with injury? Could they be? Variable muscle firing with different types of grips, fatigue patterns that we've talked about earlier today, potentially. We don't need to belabor this point. We all know what the anterior band and the ulnar collateral ligament, and this is what's going to blow out when there's trouble. We know that when you come through with late cocking, early acceleration, you're going to be somewhere between 70 and probably 110, depending on what your mechanics are. But the bottom line is we know the UCL is going to be the primary static stabilizer there. And this was touched on earlier, but if you convert this to velocity, that's 83 miles an hour. So certainly this isn't telling all the story. And we touched on this with the flexor pronator. So that has to be active. We have to have those dynamic flexor pronator activity, or we wouldn't be able to throw one changeup, a lot of these guys in the big leagues, without blowing out catastrophically. So we know these flexor pronator biomechanics and anatomy. Chris Ahmad was on a number of these papers. Peter Chalmers presented them earlier, but we know that we thought the FCU, maybe that was the most important because it's the most intimate with the UCL right below it. But then some other studies have said, well, it's actually the FDS, the superficialis. That's in other cadaveric work in EMGs, but those were the 2, right? So I ask you, with all the publications, and it makes sense that fastball's going, guys that throw 100 miles an hour are going to blow out. But from a flexor pronator standpoint, remember Nuke LaLoosh and Crash Davis, hold it like an egg? I'm not squeezing that ball very hard. Versus a slider, my PRPs are big time engaged there. I'm squeezing that hard to make it slide. Versus a curveball, FCU and FDS with that one. Is there a difference? Is it safe to throw a curveball? I don't know. Now we've got these going on. Sweepers. Some of us don't even know what sweepers necessarily mean. How about these power changeups, these mega pronators? Is that good or is that bad? I don't know. But some of these guys want to turn it over so hard that it's coming in like a saucer. And some of you guys know who those pitchers are. And I don't know if that's good or that's bad. I'll admit to you, I don't know. But I do know that I've reviewed some literature recently that hasn't been published. So I don't know who the authors are, but the pronator might be the most active of all. And if that is the case, what are we going to do with this really hardcore turning over of the baseball? There's a lot to be learned. It's exciting. Jimmy Andrews, obviously everyone knows, just very famous, made so many breakthroughs for us. It's interesting when you talk to him about this study. Is the curveball potentially harmful? I don't think that this was received the way that he intended it to be received. Now, with that being said, he said this is, our research indicated that the amount of pitching is probably a stronger indicator of injuries than the types of pitches thrown. But the one thing that it was very interesting is I bet you it would be very hard to find a 12-year-old who knows how to truly throw a curveball. Their hand's not even big enough. They don't recognize the arm speed. They don't recognize that the grip is doing all the work, right? I think that what you get into with some of these younger injuries is slurves, right? I mean, this is probably what I did or what you guys, you're holding the ball and you want to make it curve. So what do? That happens right at release. And I think those rotatory forces when you're releasing the ball probably contributes to some of the adolescent injuries when we have people throwing breaking balls too young. This is not published yet, but this is a lot of the stuff I'm doing because I'm very fascinated by it. But we took baseballs. We have these ridiculous resources like this CT scanner that's incredible. It takes a long time to do every one of these balls, but you have younger residents and research assistants that are into this. Look at the differences inside. Amazing, right? And we measured this. We did everything possible with these balls. Little League, travel, NCAA, high school, big leagues. I'll just give you a sneak peek into what's going on here. Bottom line, leather to leather measurement. Big league balls were the biggest, smallest were high school. How about seam protrusion? Anyone who's thrown a professional ball knows those seams are the smoothest. They're the lowest. You have to learn to raise the seams. But how about the weight? The heaviest, Little League. Lightest, NCAA. Now you're going from NCAA to pro ball. And if you do not think that this matters in baseball, you're crazy because those very small minutia of details does matter because it's especially with the smaller hands. So my thinking algorithm is and has been that the flexor pronator does start to fatigue. It's hard to measure that. We don't know how to measure it the best way. We've seen some studies that are doing it, but I can tell you that kid grabbing that ball, that's a four-seamer he's grabbing. It's not coming through very good. He can barely get his hand around the ball, right? He's squeezing the heck out of that just so it doesn't fly out of his hand before he can throw it where he wants to. That's a lot different than a four-seamer that I'm holding right there, right? So does he fatigue faster? Probably. Is he more susceptible to injury? Probably. I don't know how many of you are aware of this. This just came out. To me personally, this is some of the most impactful research that I've personally done when I was with the Tigers, helping with their care with Steve Lemos and Corey Trumbull, who was incredibly valuable in carrying this out. We measured 4 different hand size parameters on everybody in the Detroit Tigers organization. Then we went back and looked at their health history to see how many had a UCL reconstruction. And it was interesting. Those 2 measurements, the inertial measurement that most people know from the tennis literature, which is basically the working length of the hand, and then the spread hand, both had statistically significant differences in size between those who had UCL reconstruction and those who did not. Now, I want to make it very clear that I'm not saying that if you have a small hand that you can't be a great pitcher and you can't play pro baseball. What I am saying and what I stated in this paper was if you have somebody that you want to draft or you're interested in and they're a reliever, high velocity, mostly sliders, and they have a smaller hand, that you need to be aware of that, monitor them in a different way, and have strength and conditioning, maybe have a custom program for them with their flexor pronator strengthening. And I just think that this is something that we need to be thinking about in the future. This is still going on, but I'm just letting you know the way I'm thinking about things. So we have a number of colleges. I have a lot of pitchers in this study, and we did all the same measurements and started looking at all their pitch metrics, spin rates, velocities, et cetera. And isn't it interesting? Higher spin rates with a smaller inertial and a smaller hand, closed hand, right? So what's that mean? They are squeezing it hard. Because again, if we take someone with a smaller hand to hold that and to get that same amount of movement and to get the spin rates, I think they fatigue faster. Can't prove it, but this is where my mind's at right now. So I just want to kind of finish up with saying, if you look in literature outside of orthopedics, we know that the FDS it has to have an optimal muscle tension or length. You cannot do it on a sphere, right? You can't do it on a sphere. So we're already at bizarre muscle length relationships, not getting optimal amounts of muscle firing. And I think it does cause a difference. So in conclusion, with regards to the anatomy of the pitch, it's very grip dependent. You can do it many different ways, but some grips might be more detrimental than others. We need to do further work to determine what those are. Hand size, again, there's nothing wrong with having a smaller hand, but you just should be aware of your pitchers. And if they have a smaller hand, just make sure that you have a flexor pronator program for them and monitor them. And the bottom line is more work needs to be done. Thank you.